Okay, folks, welcome to a little special evening episode of Landmine Live. I'm here in Anchorage, my office. It's cold. It's very cold. It's actually a cold weather warning. I've lived in Anchorage for 21 years, and I've seen that a few times. But it's last night it was down to minus 15 at one point. Nothing compared to Fairbanks and other parts of interior Alaska, but it's very cold, and it does appear to be next week warming up a little bit, so it's been cold for a while. And I've talked about this a little bit, but we've been kind of burning through some of the storage of gas and Singza, the storage for natural gas that NSTAR uses. So hopefully, we get warmer and we don't have to keep dealing with this gas issue. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. First, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank John Quick down in the Kenai Peninsula for being a sponsor of Landmine Live and supporting independent journalism. I want to really thank you again, John Quick, for being a great longtime sponsor of Landmine Live. So the big news today, obviously, is last night. I'm sure if you were paying attention to the internet or at all the news, you saw that the bunch of American military helicopters and personnel went into Venezuela. There was bombing. There was the grabbing of Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and he was brought back. And it was, as far as operations go, we've seen, Iraq and bin Laden and all of, one of the helicopters crashed, and we went to get Saddam Hussein. We've seen, this last maybe thing that I was pretty young, but Noriega back in, Panama back in Just Cause. I guess that was like the late 80s. This was quick. This was decisive. It was, immediate. And we got him and brought him back to U.S., and there's been some videos of kind of the perp walk. So I'm not going to get into all of the debate about what happened. I mean, I think it's a great thing for a lot of reasons. But what is, I think, important is going forward what this means, and this could actually really directly impact Alaska and our budget. I mean, we all know that we have the permanent fund draw, the 5% draw, which this year is going to be about $4 billion. But our budget, with operating capital, it's over 5 up to 6, depending on the size of the dividend. So Venezuela, obviously, huge. Reserves of oil, huge oil producer. Now it's down. Venezuela is about 1 million barrels a day, but at their peak, they were at 3 million. They could be, 3.5 million. You look at what's happening in Guyana, some of the big oil companies. Conoco is operating there. There's tons of oil reserves, and they're producing a lot of oil. So, from my assessment, I think two things could happen. Trump talked about this in his press conference, about these American companies going back, Conoco, Exxon, Chevron. If you're not familiar, when Chavez took over in the 90s, they started nationalizing. This happened twice, but essentially they nationalized a bunch of companies. Some of the companies cut deals to basically try to recover some of their debt, but they made these rules about these Venezuelan companies. PDVSA had to have so much percentage of ownership, and they basically chased away a lot of. I mean, Venezuela. I've known people that are older that were in Venezuela in the 60s and 70s and were working there. And Venezuela was a great, prosperous, amazing country. They had huge oil resources, gold, other minerals. They have a vast amount of resources. And this Chavez guy came around, and they turned a great, prosperous country into just vast poverty, misery. I have some really good friends I've met over the years from Venezuela. One in particular, his father lost his entire life's work company. It was all nationalized. Everything was taken from him. I have friends that are over there now that I keep in touch with, and you hear about just hyper massive and crazy inflation. Waiting in line for food. I mean, there's people that used to live a really good life and have that's why so many people have left. But if what Trump says is going to happen, if it's true, if Conoco and Exxon and Chevron and these companies, if they go back into Venezuela, they're able to start producing oil, making money again, and they start flooding the market with, millions of barrels of new oil a day. I mean, the price of oil could really go down. And, Alaska, we have 700,000 people here. I don't think anybody's really ever thinking about us and what a crash in oil prices or a reduction in oil prices. It's going to affect our budget a lot, but no one's really thinking about, 700,000 people. They're thinking about the rest of the 350 million people in America that want, cheap gas and cheap energy. So that's one way it could happen. Now, the other way it could happen, I could see, is if this goes bad, if it gets, if China and Russia, Iran, a lot of that oil used to go, that Venezuelan oil, that crude oil was traded for cheap or for nothing, for materials or for resource or people who went into Venezuela. So that with China and Russia and Iran. So if it goes the other way and things go bad, and the price of oil could go up potentially, which would be bad for the world and for the United States and prices of oil for a lot of people. But for us, for Alaska, if the price of oil went up, that'd be good for our budget. That'd be good for us. So I think the more likely outcome is if things go the way Trump said, and if things go the way I think they could go, then Venezuela is opened up, companies return, money returns, capital returns, and then a lot of oil starts to be produced. There's, I mean, it's Alaska's about 500,000 barrels a day. Venezuela's about 1 million barrels a day. They could be up to easily 2, probably up to 3 or more million barrels a day, which would, if it was 2, it'd double. If it was 3, it'd triple their production. So there's all kinds of things you could talk about what happened. And personally, I think it's a great thing. I mean, this guy is it's funny. I was watching a bunch of old videos from like 1 and 2 years ago, and it was a bunch of Democrats talking about how evil he is and how Trump really didn't do anything with him last time because he was after the election that Maduro lost, that he was friends with Putin, and because he's friends with Putin and Maduro, then Trump's really likes Putin. And there's all these people like Rachel Maddow and commentators and Democratic senators and representatives just basically essentially arguing that we should have done something, but Trump was too friendly with Putin. And now it's like the same exact people are going the opposite way, and they're so mad about what happened. So it's just, the hypocrisy is incredible on this one. But I think, the drugs, the kind of just the raping of the resources and stealing of all the money and oil and minerals that belong to the people of Venezuela that have essentially gone into the hands of, a small group of people, leaders that have pillaged and taken advantage of and destroyed a really once great prosperous. Like I said, I've had friends that are older that have used to work in Venezuela and talked about how it was basically a paradise. So plus the drugs, and also, if you're not familiar with this, when they nationalized all these companies' assets years ago, in the 90s and early 2000s, Venezuela, there's been now, granted, it's international court and it's American court, so they can't enforce them. But I mean, there's judgments against Venezuela in like the billions of dollars that they owe these companies. So, Trump gave Maduro. This was it's been going on for months. The drug boats, the seizing of the oil tankers. It was made very clear that Maduro could have left. Actually, he was offered to go to Qatar. He could have gone to Qatar. He could have left and had a great life and probably been left alone, but he decided he wanted to stay and I think maybe he thought Trump was bluffing or he wasn't going to do anything. It's actually incredible. I mean, when we went to Iraq, I think it took us, months. It was several. I think it was a month or two to get Saddam Hussein. And then obviously there was the insurgency, and that was a big mess in Iraq. And then same thing with, bin Laden. They got him, but one of the helicopters crashed. It was kind of a wild. And then we look at the withdrawal in Afghanistan under, Biden, when I think it was 12 or 13 people died. It was just, this thing was, maybe it was just sheer luck, but it was clean. I mean, boom, in and out. I think it was a matter of 4 hours. And they got him and his wife, and now they are, looks like they're in New York. And there was a video on Twitter. You can see that he'd been kind of perp walked. But it's wild. And for our state, for Alaska, let's see what happens in the next few weeks and months. The legislative session starts on January 20th, just over 2 weeks away. So, we could see fluctuations very up or very down in oil. And I've been seeing some futures markets and some people talking about oil in the 50s, the $50 range, which, for every dollar the price of oil goes up or down, it's about $35 million. So right now I think the forecast was at 68. It was renewed. The new oil forecast, revenue forecast, was at 62. So if we're down to, let's say, 52, that's that could be $350 million swing, and we're already facing issues with fire suppression, disaster money that was vetoed last time, but that was already used. So there's going to be a supplemental request in the hundreds of millions for this current year's budget, going to next year's budget. What's going to happen with that? This dividend, it's an election year. So based on the up or down, especially downward price of oil by even $4 or $5 over time, an average, as far as revenue goes, it could have a huge impact on what's going to happen in Juneau. And the governor's put his full dividend nonsense in the budget again. So at the current, with everything he's been asking for with the dividend, I mean, the deficit, it's $1.5 billion. Totally unrealistic, totally crazy. There's $3 billion in the CBR, the Constitutional Budget Reserve. There's another couple $100 million at least, maybe more, for the supplemental request, which is for the current year's budget, which is money that we essentially they're going to have to find, whether it's a 3/4 vote to access the CBR, or maybe they want to. I doubt they're going to go for the ADA money. They tried to do that last time. Instead, they used the higher education fund money, which they took a couple $100 million out of that. They cut it in half, which they say they want to pay back, some people in the legislature, some senators, some representatives, but who knows? I mean, we have to pay it back. You have to have money. You have to have surplus. If there was no dividend, I think we'd have about an $800 million surplus at kind of current budget levels, but I think no dividend is pretty unrealistic unless the price of oil drops $10. If there's a huge reduction, don't forget back in 2015, Walker won in 14, the price of oil was around 70. A few months later, it was down to 30, and there was deficits in the multi-billion, $3 billion plus range for a couple of years, and that was back when we had $15-16 billion in savings. So, oil markets fluctuate; they go up and down for various reasons. But what happened in Venezuela yesterday will mean something. It will have an impact on the price of oil. Now, whether that's up or down, we'll see. My thoughts are, my prediction is it's going to go down, which would have a negative impact on our budget, our finances, our revenues, and what happens in Juneau here starting in a few weeks. So that's that. We'll see. We'll all be watching that very closely. Second thing I want to talk about is I did an article a couple days ago about Speaker Edgmon. There's an interesting situation kind of that's been brewing or going on for the last 6 months. Senator Lyman Hoffman and Senator Gary Stevens both announced in May, I think it was May for Stevens, and then in June, Lyman Hoffman announced they were resigning or retiring. So they both Lyman Hoffman's been in there since the 80s. Gary Stevens been in there since early 2000. So we're talking about guys that have been there for a long time. They're both, I think Lyman's in his late 70s. I think Gary Stevens is in his early 80s. So when Gary Stevens announced, this was kind of, we all knew this, the insider political people knew that they were both going to probably most likely retire. So when he announced, right away, Louise Stutes announced she was going to run for that seat, Speaker Stutes. She's been in the legislature for like 12 years. I think she was elected in 2014. So she was obviously a longtime House member. She was former Speaker for 2 years. So Stevens announced retirement. Louise Stutes is in. There was some talk of Sarah Vance maybe getting in. She's the other House rep. I don't think she's going to get in. I think Louise kind of has it on lock. Sarah Vance is in a very safe House seat. Whereas if she ran against Louise, I think Louise would be the overwhelming favorite. I mean, anything could happen, but it'd be a big risk unless Vance really just doesn't want to be in the House anymore and she decides. That's kind of what Ben Carpenter did last year, or I guess now in 2024, 2 years, last election. He ran for the seat against Bjorkman. I think he thought it was a tricky seat. I think he thought, I can go for it, and if I win, great. But being in the House, I think Ben Carpenter was pretty miserable. So I don't think he was really taking that much of a risk. I think it was, if I win Senate, great. If not, I don't got to be in the House. So when Stevens announced retirement, Louise Stutes was in there. Bam, she's running. That's it. Now, when Hoffman announced his retirement in June, there was an article, the Alaska Beacon did an article, and he, talked about retiring and all the things he did in his career. And then he said, I'm really going to talk to Speaker Edgmon about running for my seat. It's a really important seat. I mean, there's 4 rural House seats, and then there's 2 rural Senate seats. Those being held by Lyman Hoffman for many, many, many decades, and then also Donnie Olson, who's been in there since, I think, 2000 or 2000. I think he made it 1 in 2000. So Hoffman encouraged Edgmon. He said he was going to encourage Bryce Edgmon. I want Bryce Edgmon to run for my seat. And that was back in June. Now, fast forward to now, 6 months later. Edgmon still hasn't declared what he's going to do. And it's interesting why. There's a few reasons why. And Edgmon has a real choice to make. And I think he's ultimately going to run for the Senate. Edgmon's been in the House for 20 years. He was elected in 2006. But there's a couple things. I think the first main factor here is Bryce Edgmon has a 100% guarantee to win the House seat. He'll win the House seat no matter what. I mean, that's a guarantee. So if he goes for the Senate seat, I think he'd be the overwhelming favorite. In fact, nobody else has even filed to run for that seat yet. But there's an interesting dynamic because Bryce is very well known in Dillingham. He's been there for 20 years. He's very, very, very well known. But if he runs for the Senate seat, he expands to have another House district, the Bethel district, which he actually ran for the Senate against Lyman Hoffman back in 1994. I pulled it up here. He got it was actually kind of close. Hoffman defeated Edgmon 50.5 to 44.5%. This is back in 1994. Someone named Leonard Friedis got 5%. So he did run, 30 some years ago. But Bryce is not at all as known in Western Alaska. So that's part of it. So there's a little bit of a factor there. But the bigger factor is Chalista, who's a big player in politics in Western Alaska. They're a big supporter, huge supporter of Donlin Mine. Edgmon introduced a bill at the end of last session. It's kind of an anti-mining bill for Bristol Bay and kind of Pebble Mine focus. But I think he was pressured by some people, some anti-mining interest to introduce his bill. So Chalista is not a fan of that bill. If Edgmon runs, Chalista could conceivably, very, 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 very likely could find a candidate to run against Edgmon who they could get a lot of money to. Don't forget now, individuals can give unlimited donations. It used to be capped at 500. This went away about 4 years ago in 2021, I guess 5 years ago now, and they haven't established limits. So we saw Dunleavy and Walker back in 2022 getting people donating $50,000 and $100,000. So there's huge potential for some person. I don't know who that person would be. I'm not as familiar with that region. It's not going to be Nellie Jimmy. She already filed for the House, and it's not going to be her. But if they found a candidate to run against Edgmon and they were very, very, very well financed, Edgmon would be in a race, much more obviously competitive than if he stayed in the House where he's guaranteed to win. So that's one factor is, it's a little risky. Two is, what does Chalista do? Do they want to put somebody up and go after him and make it a real race? And then three is there's a bit of a kind of a power dynamic where Bryce is speaker now. He could stay in the House and he could, not for sure, but he could likely be speaker again, depending on some of the races go. The Republicans could pick up some seats. Louise Stutz, whoever wins her House seat, is most likely going to be kind of friendly with the Republicans. But I think Cliff Grove's David Nelson's not running. He won a seat back against Cliff Grove because it was a presidential year, a lot of base votes. I think Cliff Grove's going to take the seat back. There's a bunch of other, potential, but it's going to be fragile again. It could be this 21, 22, either way thing. So, but he could stay in the House and he could be speaker again, which, I don't know. Being speaker is probably cooler or better than being just some senator guy, brand new to the Senate. Bryce kind of runs the show in the House. Very smart guy, very strategic. But if he goes to the Senate, he's got Bert Stedman. Is he going to be with the Republicans? Is he going to be in a coalition? Is he going to try? Who knows how that goes? But regardless, he'd be one of the new guys. Smart person, very experienced, knows Juneau very well, obviously. But he's still it changes things a little bit. It's kind of interesting. Kathy Tilton, George Rauscher, they both went from the House. Now they're in the Senate. Kathy Tilton, former Speaker. Louise Stutz going to the Senate, mostly. I can't imagine she would lose that race. Former Speaker. And then if Edgmon goes, he'll be another. So you have three former speakers going to the Senate from the House, which would be very interesting. But there's the kind of power dynamic of if Edgmon stays, what he can get compared to if he goes to the Senate, what he could get. And then there's also this kind of palace intrigue or posturing or jockeying by other people in the House, kind of namely Calvin Troggy and Chuck Kopp. They want to be Speaker. So the second Edgmon decides and says, hey, I'm going to go run for the Senate, then the vacuum opened. Full opening of the power vacuum. And then there's going to be a bunch of posturing and jockeying and deal cutting and trying to organization and move making and people trying to operate to set up the next organization for the 2027, the legislature that's going to start in 2027. So maybe he's thinking, well, if I wait, nobody else has filed, I can kind of keep this posturing and organizational stuff. I can push that back a little further if I wait till, mid-session or the end of session. The filing deadline is June 1st. Now, I think him waiting till June 1st would be kind of a little bit risky because if somebody else gets in and they're a known person, they start campaigning, he's going to want to at least have it known that he's running for the seat. And I think it'd be almost look worse if he decides to declare after somebody else gets in. I think he should be the first one. I think he should have declared a long time ago and said, look, I've been in the House 20 years. I'm going to go to the Senate. Senator Hoffman, who's very, very popular, who kind of like can't lose, never lost. He endorses Edgmon. He's Edgmon's a favorite. But there's all these other reasons I think he's thinking about, so he's got a real decision to make. So It's I was really sure that he was going to at least decide by the end of the year. And that's why I did that article on the 31st, because he still hadn't decided what he was going to do. There was even a fundraiser a few months ago. I think it was a month and a half ago. It was him, Giesel, and there was one other, I forget who. There was three people. I think it might have been, it was Stutz. It was Stutz, Giesel, and Edgmon. And it appeared, I thought that was, they're all running for the Senate, so therefore that was going to be him coming out and saying, I'm running for the Senate. I think he was weathered in, or he didn't make it to the fundraiser. So it's very interesting what he's going to do and what he's thinking and his decision. I think, I'm kind of the go big or go home. 20 years in the House. I mean, it's a long time. Being Speaker 3 times. And then I think no matter what happens, no matter if the coalition stays intact, the Democrats kind of stay in power with the coalition, or if the Republicans take over, it's going to be a very close, like I said, 21 or 22 number, very narrow margin majority again. Now, if Bryce does leave and goes for the Senate, already Stutz and Tilton are gone. Bryce is kind of really a big strategist, hyper tactical, thinks about the stuff way ahead. If he goes away and Stutz is gone and Tilton's gone, I mean, you're losing a lot of kind of institutional knowledge. It'll be very fascinating to see who steps in kind of that leadership role. And it's one person will be, obviously Speaker, but then you have other people in leadership. You have co-chairs of finance. You have the rules chair. You have a team. It's not just one person; it's a team. And what kind of team comes together and leads? And we've seen when the Republicans were in charge before this one, the last couple of years, they had a lot of challenges internally. They couldn't decide on the dividend. They couldn't decide on education policy. They couldn't decide on all kind of pension. They were just split on a lot of things. The budget, increase it, decrease it, cut it. All these. So they had a really hard time. They were in a really precarious situation when they had 19 Republicans, but then they had, the 4 Bush. So we saw, like when Craig Johnson was rules chair and he wanted to develop a new education bill, they couldn't even adopt the bill that they had tried to run through the Rules Committee, which is a weird place to run a bill. The Rules Committee, it should have gone to the Education Committee. They tried to do all this education stuff, and when it got to the floor, they didn't even have the 21 votes required to adopt the bill. So you could have a majority and not really have a majority. So it could be the other side too. The Democrats could keep the coalition, get a few Republicans, and they could be in a very similar situation where they don't really have any true leadership, or they're split, so they're so divided that they can't function. It'll be very interesting. And who's going to be governor? There's all these people running for governor. That's another thing. I heard that Jonathan Christ Tompkins was considering running for governor. He went on Andrew Gray's podcast last week. I texted Jonathan Christ Tompkins. He's a former Democratic. I think he was in there for 10 years in the House. And he said he's thinking about it. He didn't say he's running, but he's thinking about it. So that would be another Democrat in the race. That would be Tom Begich, Matt Clayman, and then Jonathan Christ Tompkins. We're still 6 months out to the filing deadline. So I've said this before. I think there's going to be 25, 30 maybe candidates. Now, granted, a lot of them are going to be not serious. They aren't going to have a lot of money. But I think there's going to be a ton of candidates. Maybe not as many as the Don Young. There was like 47 or 48, or I think it was 49. It went down a few. But there was a lot of people running for that Don Young seat. So I think we're not going to be that many, but I think it could be very likely be 25 or 30. And then there's going to be who goes to the top 4. We're going to have 1 Democrat, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, a Democrat, 2 Republicans, an independent. I mean, it's really hard to tell. And then how does the ranked choice element go? So it's going to be who's going to be in charge of the House, who's going to be in charge of the Senate, who's going to be governor, in a situation where, depending on how the price of oil goes, what this Venezuela thing happens, there could easily be a situation where this year there's no dividend, or almost no dividend, a deficit going into the CBR, draining most of the rest of the CBR. So you could have the next governor could conceivably come in there with $1 billion or $1.5 billion in the CBR, which is really nothing in the grand scheme of things when our budget's like $5 or $6 billion. Myriad problems with education. I mean, we still have fights over that. They raised the BSA, the base student allocation, and schools are still talking about we need more money. This pension fight, it's going to be another fight this session. The House passed the pension bill. There's, I think, the votes in the Senate to pass the pension bill. It's going to be a big fight in the Senate. This is the Chuck Kopp, kind of the pension. It's not really that. It's kind of a basic pension. It's nothing like the tier 3 or tier 2 or tier 1 pensions we used to have. But the governor, I think, would surely veto that, which then becomes a campaign issue. And there's just a lot. This gas line thing is going to be. They're already talking about property tax, lowering, reducing the property tax. Which, I mean, I'm still skeptical on the gas line. I think because Trump really wants the gas line, I think there's a really much better chance than ever it's going to happen. But even then, I think it's still below 50%. But it's kind of fascinating. I've seen some of the people react to the governor saying we need to massively reduce the property taxes for the gas line to go through, so we can make that more feasible. If it's me, I'm thinking I'd much rather have cheap, abundant, forever energy than some property tax. It's like penny wise, pound foolish. So that's going to be a fight over this property tax thing and this gas line, and if that's going to be built. The other issue is this Fairbanks offtake, which I've heard different kind of things about. If I'm Fairbanks delegation, I'm saying if the pipeline bypasses Fairbanks shouldn't have to build the offtake or finance or bond out the offtake line. That should be part of the deal. There should obviously be gas delivered as part of the pipe if it gets built to Fairbanks. It's just nuts that I'm hearing Fairbanks. There's been some people that think, Fairbanks is going to have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build an offtake line, which is insane. That should definitely be part of the deal. But as far as the property tax, I think it's being very short-sighted and foolish to think, I want to get all this property tax money, which could jeopardize potentially, if it's going to jeopardize the gas line. Think about, right now in South Central, we're a couple years away from imports. We're going through a lot of the stored gas right now because it's so cold. Cook Inlet's not producing as much as it did. There's not an economic incentive to go get more gas out of Cook Inlet because if these companies spend the money to get more gas and they find a big chunk of gas, a whole bunch of gas, we can't. Our demand is flat in South Central. It's about 70 BCF a year. So if they go and find another trillion or something cubic feet, that's fine to have for Anchorage, but they can't export it. There's no way to export gas right now from Cook Inlet. We used to have that a long time ago. That's gone. So there's a whole bunch of energy issues in the state. And I'm still, again, skeptical of the gas line for a lot of reasons I've laid out. But because Trump really does want it, it's more likely than ever. Still, I think it's less than half. I think it's 40% chance. But that's going to be a big topic of session. So that, the pension bill, the budget, the dividend, the deficit, if there's, the price of oil going down, there's going to be a kind of a lot of things going on. And there's going to be all this in the guise of all the House members are up for election, 10 of the senators are up for election, the governor's race, there's going to be the Senate race. Dan Sullivan so far has no real opponent. There's chatter about Mary Peltola, but we still haven't seen what she's going to do. And then we have the Nick Begich race as well. So he's got this Matt Schultz guy, this Reverend Matt Schultz, who's claiming to raise money, but I haven't seen him campaign much yet. So there's going to be a lot going on. Last year, or 2024, there was only the U.S. House race, Nick Begich and Mary Peltola. There was no governor's race, no Senate race. Now in 2022, we had the same thing we're going to have this year: Senate race, governor's race, House race. And this year it's an open open governor's race, which we haven't seen an open governor's race in Alaska since 2002, right? Since Tony Knowles was termed out. So we're talking about 24 years in the state where we've had an open governor's race. Because 2006, right? He lost, but there was Murkowski was governor. He got beat by Palin. Okay, Palin resigned 2 years into a term. Then you had Parnell. Parnell won in 2010. Okay, so Parnell was the incumbent. 2014, Parnell was the incumbent. Now he got beat by Bill Walker, but still there was an incumbent. 2018, there was Bill Walker was the incumbent. Now Dunleavy won. Okay, so Dunleavy won, and then Dunleavy won again in 2022. First time since 2002 that we have an open governor's race, and we have a lot of people. I think it's 12 Republicans and 2 Democrats. If Jonathan Christ-Tompkins get in, it could be 3 Democrats, and there's more to come. So it's going to be a very interesting, fascinating 2026. I'm going to be covering all of this. I'm going to Juneau in a few weeks. I'm going to be in Juneau again for the 8th year in a row covering the legislative session. We also have 6 assembly races coming up here in April in Anchorage. I think there's going to be a little bit of shift. I think Dave Donnelly is very likely going to win the Midtown district. That's where I live. Felix Rivera is termed out. He's running against Janice Park, who's kind of run for a lot of things. She's never won anything. Dave has been on the school board. Dave's pretty well known. So if Dave does win, you go from 9-3 on the assembly, progressive bloc to conservatives, to 8-4. If one of the other seats were to, get won by a conservative, you could go to a 7-5, to a 7-5. So then all of a sudden it's much different dynamic on the assembly. Chris Constance termed out. Felix Rivera's termed out. Zach Johnson's not running again. So and that's a seat that conservatives could pick up. I don't think they really have anybody running yet. I don't think there's a conservative candidate. I mean, the filing deadline's, I think, in a few weeks, so they need to hurry up. But, I mean, if the conservatives kind of picked up 2 seats, that would really change the whole dynamic of the assembly. LaFrance would lose the veto-proof, she'd lose the override. She wouldn't have the over, if there was something was overridden. She wouldn't. Right now she has a kind of assembly in lockstep. She can do whatever they can do whatever they want. She can do what she wants, and they're going to kind of go along with it. We've seen how bad that is. We've seen the kind of devastation of this homelessness problem not getting solved, the crime problem, the theft problem. We've seen all this. The housing, she wants to do all this housing stuff, and there's been no progress, almost no progress on that. So the assembly could change quite a bit in Anchorage. That's going to set up, the next mayoral race in 2027 in April. And then we're going to have all of this other stuff happening. So I'll be in Juneau, going there in a few weeks. I'm actually going to D.C. On Monday. I got some business in D.C. I'm going to be trying to sell some Alaska Political Report subscriptions. By the way, if you don't get the Alaska Political Report, please consider subscribing to the Alaska Political Report. We're going to be covering all of the races, all the APOC reports, all of the campaign finance reports, all of the election stuff, the whole Juneau, the session, all of it. So get a hold of me. Send you some previous editions of the Alaska Political Report and show you what that is. There's a great team of us, and we're putting out really, it's stuff nobody else is covering. So I'll be doing that. And then I'll be going to, like I said, Juneau in a few weeks through May, be back. And then there's going to be debates. We're going to be doing coverage of all these races. There's going to be a lot going on. The primaries in August. We're going to have an election central situation party we do. We're going to do another big one at the Egan in November for the general. So it's going to be a very, very, very busy year for the Landmine and for Alaska politics. So, folks, thanks for watching. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank John Quick, who's a great sponsor down in the Kenai. He's been a really great supporter of Landmine Live, and I really want to thank him for being a sponsor. Thanks again, John Quick. And if you're interested in sponsoring or Landmine Live or the podcast, get a hold of me. You can message me or email me, jeff@alaskalandmine.com. And if you like what I'm doing, if you enjoy the Landmine, please consider making a one-time or monthly recurring donation at alaskalandmine.com/subscribe. Or if you have a business, organization, campaign, group, and you want to do an ad, I'm happy to share with you the ad rate sheet and our analytics of the website. We have tons of, 100,000 plus hits on the website a month. I'm happy to share with you the analytics. So thanks a lot, folks. If you're in South Central and especially interior Alaska, stay warm.